topic which is very important in Vedantic philosophy is about knowledge. The knowledge per se. So what are the means of knowledge? What is correct knowledge? What is wrong knowledge? This whole thing has been dissected out in great detail in Vedantic philosophy. Okay? Much more detailed than any of the Western philosophy books that I've seen that have been prescribed in the universities. The pramana and the pramana lakshanas are very, very detailed described in the Vedantic and Vedic philosophy. So I'll just give you a brief overview of this. So how do we know the supreme? So we need to know what are the means of knowledge, what are the various ways in which we can know anything for a start. So there are three Sanskrit words, jnana, jnatra and jnaya. So jnaya means the object to be known. Jnatra is the person who knows that object. And when the person sees that object and knowledge generates in him. So that is called jnana. So that is otherwise known as yatam, which means knowing an object as it is in its is pramana. So if there is a mobile phone on the table, knowing that mobile phone as it is on the table is pramana, in the sense that having that knowledge that that mobile phone is on the table as it is true knowledge. Okay? So that is jnana, jnatra and jnaya relationship. And the Vedantic philosophers have thought about this in great detail, of what are all the mechanisms of knowing knowledge. So they broadly divided means of knowledge into three. There is something called pratyaksha, then there is anumana, and there is something called agama. So these are the three types of knowledge. Pratyaksha means perception. So direct perception, directly seeing this mobile phone on the table is perceptual knowledge. Okay. Anumana means inferential knowledge, i.e., I'm in a different room and I hear a phone ringing in the other room, then I know two things. Because I've heard the phone ringing, I know that there is a phone ringing, and I also infer that this phone that is ringing is on the table in the study room. Okay. That inference is anumana. Okay. But then there is another entirely different group or means of knowledge called agama or verbal testimony. Now, why is this all important and why am I actually bringing this along? You will soon find out in the very next slide. So Abhijit, moving on to the next slide. So the next slide essentially is talking to you about perceptual knowledge. Okay, so now this is where our scientists, including all of us who are listening here, we fall very badly. We fall very badly on the ground because we are constantly, we all think that we have a very scientific bent of mind, and that this whole business of existence of God does not make sense because there is no instrument or nobody has ever seen this being. So this thing does not exist is a popular philosophy, including the ones that are propagated by atheists such as Richard Dawkins and many others. Here is a direct answer to their flawed philosophy. Okay, so the first one you need to go understand is, can we know about the Supreme through perceptual knowledge? So what is perceptual knowledge? We have 5 indriyas. We have 5 indriyas: eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and skin for touch. So how do we interact with the external world? We have shabda, sparsha, rasa, rupa, and gandha. So with these 5 tanmatras, the 5 indriyas contact with the objects that have these qualities, and the nerve impulses that go from these indriyas go to our brain. Our brain, it goes to the specific aspects of our brain, and then the brain processes it, and the sum total of chemical reactions forms some kind of a process within the mind, and the mind then the buddhi, which is a component of the mind, then processes this further and understands exactly what it is, and then a knowledge is generated. Where is that knowledge generated? The knowledge is not generated in the mind. The knowledge is generated in the soul. The soul then says, yes, I have a knowledge of this rose, which is outside in the external world. The knowledge is generated in the soul. The reason being, we discussed last week that consciousness is the symptom of the soul. What is consciousness? Consciousness is the awareness of the self and also of the external world. So that consciousness is placed in the soul. So it is the soul that becomes aware of the external world. Okay. Now, with my sense organs, I can only see so many things. I cannot see a bacteria, for example. So I use a microscope and I see a bacteria. I cannot see the distant stars, so I use the Hubble telescope and I see the distant stars. Or, I don't want to see the distant stars in the normal wavelength of light. I want to go either ultraviolet or infrared. So you use an infrared telescope and you look at the world very far away from our solar system. Or you can go to the CERN laboratory and you can use a cyclotron or any of those things to try and break open the atom, and you use the instrument to understand what is there inside the atom. So you can use these instruments, but at the end of the day, still you use these instruments, you make you assess, you generate a data, and the data is processed by your indriyas, which goes to your brain, your mind, your buddhi. Okay. So what I'm trying to get at is, all that we are doing at this point of time, as scientists or whatever, we are just looking at the external world using instruments and our sense organs. Ultimately, it boils down to our sense organs. Now, can we claim that our sense organs are perfect? That is a big question. Okay. So now, there is what is a true perception? So Madhvacharya, for example, in a work called Pramana Lakshanam, he writes, Nirdosha Artha Indriya Sannikarsham Pratyaksham. That means a defectless contact between the sense object and the sense organs, and the knowledge that is generated by a defectless contact between the two is true knowledge. Now, can we claim that have that perfect contact? Sometimes not, but most of the time we do for our normal transactions of life. Now, the key here is the Vedas and the Vedantic philosophies have already described that this supreme being is beyond matter. Rig Veda, for example, is Paramatraya Tanva Vridana Natve Mahitvam Anvashnuvanti Nate Vishnu Jayamano Najato Deva Mahimnaha Param Antamapa. And it goes on and celebrates this Paraha Matraya. So Paro Matraya, there are various ways of looking at this two verses. So Matra means Tanmatras, Para means beyond. So he's beyond the Tanmatras is one way. Matra means Miti, so which means that he's beyond everything. So if something is beyond matter, no matter what instrument, your material instruments you're going to use, you're not going to be able to see him. Yeah. Then the same thing the Rig Veda also says, again in Purusha Shukta, Purusha eva idam sarvam yad bhutam yad chabhavyam uta amrutatvasya ishanaha yad anyena atirohati. Okay. It says yad anyena atirohati. Atirohati means he's beyond. Anna means this world. This world is Anna. Anna is the food that we eat. This world is a food for him because during dissolution he eats it. Yeah. So that's why the Vedic philosophers, Anna is referred to the world. Anna also means Brahman in other contexts. So he says he is beyond this Anna. He is beyond this world. Okay. And Sutra of Veda Vyasa says Arupavat eva hi tat pradhanatvat. He does not have a material form at all because he is not made of matter. Yeah. Matsya Purana again also says the same thing. Bhautikani hi rupani bhutebhyo asau paro yataha. So that is, so this Bhautikani rupa, this guy does not have. So that is why he is called Arupavan Ataha Proktaha Vatad Avyaktataha Pare. So he is beyond Avyakta, which is matter. That is why he is called Arupa. Again in chapter 15, in the last 3 verses, it is described in great detail. So I would urge you to look into that. So from this we gather that this supreme being whom the Vedas is saying Tameva Vidvan Amrita Iha Bhavati, he is the only person to be known who will give you salvation. Now we understand, because he is beyond matter, you cannot use your sense organs, you cannot use your instruments to know him. That we understand. Now, understanding this concept would then settle various problems that have happened in philosophy, but also various Upanishads are also giving this idea as to, because this guy is beyond matter, there are certain things you can't do about it. So Katha Upanishad basically it says Ashabdam, Asparsham, Arupam, Avyayam, Tata, Arasam, Nityam, Agandavachayat. So it describes this Brahman as Ashabdam, you can't hear him. Arupam, he has no form. Avyayam, he is distractless. Tata arasam. So you can't taste him. He is agandavache. You can't smell him. So you can't do any of this because you are using the sense organs to do all these things for material things. He is beyond material things. Taittiriya Upanishad again would say, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. He is beyond words. He is beyond mind. You cannot reach him. So that is a very, very mystical way of describing this Brahman. Now, if anybody, any atheist who comes to you and says, prove to me that God exists, I would ask you to take this reference from Keno Upanishad and give this to that person. Okay? So Keno Upanishad is also called Talavakara Upanishad, and we described very briefly before. It is part of the Samaveda. The other big Upanishad in Samaveda is Chandogya Upanishad. So Keno Upanishad is a dialogue between Chaturmukha Brahma. So Chaturmukha Brahma is actually telling Shiva, Natatra Chakshur Gacchati, Nava Gacchati no Manaha, you cannot reach him with your eyes, you cannot reach him with your hearing, and so on. But then it says, Yad Vacha Anabhyutitam Yena Vak Abhyutyate. Even I cannot, he cannot be, you cannot hear him, but yet your hearing operates because of him. You cannot speak about him, yet his speech, your speech operates because of him. So what it is telling is, I can't describe unto God, but you have to experience this for yourself. Just as how you would use a microscope to see microbes which you cannot see with your eyes, similarly, you use the scriptures as microscope to try and discover and find him, and you experience him. Each person experiences the Supreme in his own way. Each person's experience of Supreme is different. Okay? So it says, Tadeva Brahma Tvam Vidhi, Na Idam Yadidam Upasate. He is right next to you, but you need to know him as that, and you need to experience him as that. So because this God is beyond matter, none of our perceptual knowledge is going to pick him up. And this is the idea that is described various ways. For example, if you take Shvetashvatara Upanishad, there is a famous verse, and certain schools have picked upon this to describe the Supreme Brahman as attributeless. And I just want to illustrate this point here. Shvetashvatara Upanishad, for example, says, Eko Devaha, Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhaha, Sarva Vyapi, Sarva Bhutantaratma, Karmadi Akshaha, Sarva Bhutadi Vasaha, Sakshi, Cheto, Kevalo, and then Nirgunashcha. Okay? So this verse needs to be looked at very carefully. And as I said before, one should not pluck words from Upanishads and come up with a hypothesis. One should see what the verse is actually saying. So this verse of Shvetashvatara Upanishad is actually describing 9 huge qualities of Brahman. And then it is saying Nirguna. Okay? He said he is Eka, he is Deva, he is Sarva Bhuteshu Buddha, he is in everything. Sarva Vyapi, he is everywhere. Sarva Bhutantaratma, he is in all jivas. Karmadi, he does all the activities. Akshaha, he is a direct perceptor of everything. Sarva Bhutadi Vasa, he is in all of the material world. Sakshi, he is the ultimate perceiver. Chetaha, he is the greatest consciousness. Kevala, he is Swatantra. And then he says Nirguna. So what that Nirguna actually means is, Nirguna, Guna is Triguna. Triguna is Sattva, Rajas and Tama. So Nirguna means that Supreme Person does not have Sattva, Rajas and Tamo Guna of matter. He is beyond matter. So that is how we understand what Nirguna for Brahman actually means. Not that he is an attributeless zero. Okay? And again, Upanishads also talk about Brahman as Saguna. Saguna means he has all auspicious attributes also, he says. Say, for example, the same Shvetashvatara Upanishad goes on and says, Parasya Shaktihi Vividaiva Shruyate Swabhaviki Jnana Bala Kriyacha. He describes about his strengths, his great attributes. Taittiriya Upanishad, we have discussed this last time. Brahma Vidapnoti Param, Manam, Anantam, Brahma. Satya as a quality, Jnana as a quality, Anantam as a quality. It is defining this Brahman as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. So anywhere in the Upanishads you take, when you understand, when somebody says Nirguna, what it means is Brahman does not have material gunas. When I say Saguna, it means he has non-material, infinite, auspicious attributes. Okay? So that is the core message in that slide. So the questions for his own to contemplate here is, so is this Brahman Nirguna or Saguna? So Vishishta and Dvaita will take, he has infinite non-material attributes but no defects. Advaita would take no attributes, no activity. This is an inert substance on which everything else is superimposed. Buddhism is on a similar plane. We'd also describe this concept of Sunya. Shunya means it is some attributeless nothing, zero. That is the ultimate truth. Okay, so something for us to think about, and you can find your own answers by reading through scriptures and what the various philosophers of Vedanta have talked about this. So now we understand that direct perception through our senses, we cannot see God, and that we can't do that because God is non-material, he is beyond matter. Okay? Now what about the second form of knowledge, which is logic or reasoning or inferential knowledge? Can that give us an idea about God? Immanuel Kant, for those of Western philosophy students, would know this guy quite well. He is a big Western philosopher, and he writes a book called Critique of Pure Reason, worth reading. Okay, and there he claims God cannot be known by pure reasoning. Okay? He makes a claim. And when I saw this statement, it was very clear that he had plucked it, or maybe he did not know that Katha Upanishad had described this, thousands of years ago. It said, Naisha tarkena matirapaneya, prokta anyenaiva sugnanaya preshta. Tarka means logic or reasoning. So, Yama is saying, Na ishaha tarkena matihi apaneya. Okay? So that Isha, you cannot know him by logic or reasoning. And again, this is a very popular fallacy and thing that we have, that somehow if we become spiritual, or somehow we get into Vedas and Vedantas, we become illogical, unreasonable people. But I just want to remind those people who think us that way, that the Vedic philosophy and the Vedantic philosophers have dissected out Anumana or logic or the reasoning in minute detail. The whole philosophy of Nyaya, Tarka Shastra, describe this in great detail also. What are the various components of reasoning? What is the position of reasoning in Pramanas, for example? So in Pramana Lakshanam, this is to give you a very easy, broad overview of this is, our philosophers will actually say any reasoning or logic has 5 components. Pratigna, Hetu, Udaharana, Upanaya, Nigamana, Pancha, Avayavaha. Okay, so Pratigna means mountain has fire. That is my claim. Hetuhu, because it has smoke. Udaharana, where there is smoke, there is fire, which is called invariable concomitance between smoke and fire. In Sanskrit parlance, it's called Vyapti, as in a kitchen. Upanaya, such a smoke exists in this mountain, thus the mountain has fire. So this is the basic components of inference. Now, the Vedic philosophy discusses each aspect and talks about great details. Let's not waste time here. But this is just to introduce you the concept. Even logic and reasoning cannot be used to prove God, because logic and reasoning is a dependent proof. It is not an independent proof. The reason being, in this example that I've cited about the mountain, you're doing 2 perceptions with your eyes. Number 1, you're perceiving the smoke, which is material. Number 2, you have perceived a similar smoke and fire in a kitchen, maybe day before yesterday. So you have had 2 perceptions, and you link 2 perceptions to come to a logical conclusion as to what is going on in this mountain. Then you get the knowledge of the fire being present in the mountain. So even for inferential knowledge, you need perception. You need 2 perceptions to generate the inferential knowledge, minimum 2 perceptions. So that tells you that logic itself is a dependent proof. It is not an independent proof at all. Anybody who claims with logic they can disprove God is seriously wrong. And anybody who also will prove God through logic is also wrong. Because both ways it will not work. Because if you use perception, you will never be able to get to the bottom of the problem, because God is non-material. Okay? But that perception you use in your day-to-day life. And let me tell you, as somebody who runs a research group, most of the time, what we are using in our day-to-day work is logical reasoning based on perception. It's got its own limitations, and we need to understand that. Without understanding the limitations, we can't move to our journey. We can't start our journey. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So then we have to now understand, if God cannot be known by perception, if God cannot be known by inference, then it means that God can only be known through revealed scriptures. That is the conclusion of the Vedas, the conclusions of all the Vedantic philosophers and of all the religions of the world. They've all concluded this, that God can be known only through revealed scriptures, be it the Bible or the Torah or the Vedas. You can know the God only through revealed scriptures. Veda Vyasa wrote a very important sutra, third sutra. It's called Shastra Yonitva. So you can know him only through the Shastras, is the meaning of that word. Madhva, for example, in his very important work called Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, he starts off saying, Sadagamaika Vigneyam Samatita Kshara Aksharam Narayanam Sada Vande Nirdosha Asesha Sadgunam. So he says in the first line, Sadagamaika Vigneyam. That means Sada Agama Eka Vigneyam. So that is how you separate that word. Sada Agama, which means Sad Agama or Sada Agama. Always through Agamas and always through authentic Agamas is only you can know him. And then he goes on and defines what are these Sadagamas. And he gives an evidence from Brahmanda Purana. So Brahmanda Purana says, Rigadya Bharatam Chaiva Pancharatra Mata Akilam Mula Ramayanam Chaiva Puranam Chayetadatmakam Yeche Anuyayinas Tesham Sarvetecha Sadagama. Okay. Duragamas Tadanyeye Tairnagneyo Janardana. So what that means is Rigadya. Rigadya means Rig, Yajur, Sama and Atharvana Veda. So 4 Vedas. Bharatam, which means Mahabharatam. Then Pancharatra Agamas. Pancharatra Agama is the 6th. And then Mula Ramayanam. So these seven are the core Agamas by which we can know the Supreme. Then it says Yeche, and then he also talks about Puranas. Okay. So Mula Ramayanam Chaiva Puranam Cha Etadatmakam. Okay. So these Puranas, they all form the 7. Then he says Puranas that concur with the 7. Okay. And then anything else that concurs with these sets. So the 7 core texts and the Puranas, anything, for example, what I have told today or what Sudarshan is going to say tomorrow, if it concurs with these Agamas, that is also an Agama, because it gives you the knowledge of the Supreme. But then it says, Duragamas Tadanyeye Tairnagneyo Janardana. Anything that does not tell you about the Supreme is Duragama. Duragama is not worth the study. It is not a scripture. That is the different, that is the classification. Okay. So that is what we need to hold in our minds. So these are all the core scriptures that all acharyas, not just Madhva, Ramanujacharya has also said exactly the same thing. Now, I want to pick on one of the things here. So, Abhijit, just stay on the previous slide. Pancharatra Agamas, for example. I want to just spend 1 minute talking about Pancharatra Agamas, which many of you may not be familiar with. And Mula Ramayana, you may not be familiar with. All the Ramayana that we know today is Valmiki Ramayana. Who said that Valmiki Ramayana is the original Ramayana? Is anybody is going to be claiming that they are miserably wrong? Valmiki Ramayana is a version of Ramayana. There is an original Ramayana that exists. It's called Mula Ramayana. That Mula Ramayana was told by Hayagriva Nama Paramatma. So Vishnu in the form of Hayagriva actually gives it to Chaturmukha Brahma. So that is the Mula Ramayana. And everything else that has come through is part of the Mula Ramayana. Pancharatra Agamas, for example. Again, Pancharatra Agama is Vishnu in Hayagriva form gives this over 5 nights to 5 important people. Chaturmukha Brahma, Garuda, Sesha, Rudra, Vishwaksena. So for these 5 guys, Hayagriva Nama Paramatma gives this scriptures. Okay. So these two, the Pancharatra Agama and Mula Ramayana, also form a core text for Dvaits and Vishishtadvaita schools. They form a core essence of the Vaishnava school of philosophy.
HinduKnowledgeAcademy.com will celebrate Vedic culture and present its philosophies to the modern Hindu in an accessible format. Our ancient heritage is our greatest strength. Through preservation and dissemination, together let us spread positivity in the world. Thank you for listening and welcome to Hindu Knowledge Academy.